So next, we have a kind of a group presentation, I believe. Our presenters are Frankie Coburn, once again, who we saw earlier this morning, as well as Kimberly Jenkins and Doug Von Gausig. They are presenting on the discovery of Aphyllon riparium, a rare riparian holoparasite new to the Arizona flora. And I will briefly introduce them. So again, we met Frankie earlier this morning, but again, Frankie is from Prescott and attended school in many parts of Arizona and is now working as an independent consultant throughout the southwestern US and California. Kimberly Jenkins has been the chairman of the board for the Verde River Institute for 4 years, and she also works as a Verde River ranger and education and monitoring instructor. Kim's passion for saving the Verde is a real asset to the Institute. She's also a registered nurse and an avid outdoors person, and her sharp eyes were the first to notice the bottleneck brumate in the Verde, which is what we're speaking on today. And then lastly, Doug Von Gausig is the executive director of the Verde River Institute. He's worked on Verde River conservation for the last 35 years. As a biologist and a naturalist, Doug spends most of his time working on the Verde's health and diversity. As a commercial drone pilot, he has developed innovative drone deployed monitoring, mapping, and water quality testing in Arizona, and uses drones to help us understand the Verde and its ecosystems. So thank you very much, all three of you, for joining us. I'm not sure who's taking it away next, but the floor is all yours to present.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll try to do this as a group chat. We'll be switching off and on, but we just wanted to share with everybody this recent discovery and a recent addition to the Arizona flora of Aphyllon riparium, a root parasite that was found by Kim and Doug along the Verde River. And yeah, they have an excellent citizen science program going, and that led to the discovery of this new addition to the flora. And so I just wanted to give a little bit of introduction. I ended up collaborating with them on collecting it, and we just wanted to introduce you to the species and some of the great citizen science work that they're doing down on the Verde River, and how citizen science and citizens making observations of natural history can lead to discoveries like this. So if my slide will, oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, so I'll just start off by giving a little introduction to the genus Aphyllon and the Orobanchaceae, just to give you a little context and kind of a broader picture. But the family Orobanchaceae, it's around 99 genera and 2,100 species of mostly parasites that lack chlorophyll. So they completely rely on their hosts for the most part to get their energy. And they don't produce it on their own. They don't photosynthesize for the most part in the family. What was previously called the genus Orobanchaceae, but now the New World plants have been split off into Aphyllon. This genus is completely lacks chlorophyll, so they're achlorophyllous. So like I said, the genus was split a few years ago with more and more evidence, molecular evidence and morphological evidence. So now that Orobanchaceae only includes Old World plants and Aphyllon is in the New World. The genus has a wide variety of hosts, mostly in the family Asteraceae. So yeah, so this species Aphyllon riparium was described in 2016, but it's originally a part of this ludoviciana complex. And so anybody that has gone around and seen Orobanche species or Aphyllon in the west probably knows that several species look kind of similar. And these were all under the umbrella species of ludoviciana for a long time, until the early 70s when Turner Collins started to segregate that species and realized that that this ludovicianum was in fact made up of multiple species. And so that started the process of describing a lot of these things, which led them to publish numerous papers over the years, segregating out all of these different species. And then most recently, Aphyllon riparium in 2016. And so, you'll run into these species, but they have some differences. And all of these occur somewhat in our area, at least in Arizona. And you can see some of these differences. So with the ludovicianum, the more widespread species has rounded corolla lobes, while cooperi, riparium, and arizonicum all have sharp, acute corolla lobes. The hosts differ as well. So all of these other species have perennial hosts in the Asteraceae, while riparium has an annual Asteraceae hosts. Riparium also occurs only in riparian areas or in bottomlands. And while Arizonicum is up in the Great Basin, Colorado Plateau, its host is Gutierrezia. Ludoviciana is widespread in uplands. And then Aphyllon cooperi occurs in Sonoran and Mojave Desert ravines. And so all these species are in the area, and it's possible that botanists have passed them up, that riparium has been here in front of us all along, but it's one of these taxonomic complexes that get overlooked because of similarity with other species. And so I'm hoping we can give you some more motivation to maybe look a little closer at these things and see if you may be seeing Aphyllon riparium. And so now, and so after this species was described in 2016, Turner Collins published this paper and mapped it out. And so it's now been known to be widespread, but rare where it occurs. It was only known from the Midwest, and then they started finding it in New Mexico, and now we've found a location in Arizona. It's currently listed globally as G4, but it's critically imperiled in every state that has received a conservation assessment. And talking to Turner Collins personally, he believes it's very rare. And so this is a super rare species that grows in a very specific habitat. Is it more common though? Like I said, the taxonomic confusion with these things may have led to it being overlooked, and it may be in fact more common than we think. And so I'll hand it over to Doug now and Kim to go through some of the Verde River, where we found it, and introducing the discovery of this plant in Arizona.
Yeah, thank you, Frankie. And that was really a great introduction to the plant, because just the fact that it's been overlooked so easily is I think part of the whole story. And not just because of the fact that it's very similar to the other two species that occur in Arizona, but because it hides all the time.
It does.
It hides in places where nobody wants to go. So we'll talk about that a little bit. It's a pretty unusual plant. So this, on the right side of my screen is the Verde River watershed. It starts up north of Seligman, north of I-40, and goes all the way down to Fountain Hills, pretty close to the confluence with the Salt River. And the river itself is about 192 miles long, flows through the bottom half of the watershed. And it's now become a major recreational river in Arizona. A lot of people, about 8,000 a year, are boating the stretch that we're in. And that's the stretch that the Verde River Institute primarily operates in, doing a lot of scientific work in there, water quality monitoring of various kinds. And that's how we came across this species. So next slide, Frankie. Oh, and it's one of the last free-flowing rivers, by the way, in Arizona. So of the larger rivers of Arizona, 7 are now intermittent or no longer flow from their headwaters to their natural terminus. The Verde River is the largest of the rivers in Arizona that still does that. And they're all endangered for the same reasons. Essentially, the Verde's most pressing issue is depletion of groundwater in that watershed. All of these rivers are 100% dependent for their base flow on groundwater that's discharging as springs along their courses. And in competition with the river are all of the people and all of the industry and all of the farms in most of central Arizona. So 100% of the people in the Verde River watershed use groundwater for their primary water source. The farms that are in the Verde River watershed use surface water from the Verde for the farms. And all of this means that the Verde River headwaters are overtaxed, and so is the river overtaxed all the way through its course. So from the town of Clarkdale, where we operate, to its headwaters about 40 miles upstream, we have a mostly losing stretch of water naturally. So just evapotranspiration takes more water out of the river than is being recharged until it gets to a point about 20 miles upstream from Clarkdale. And then it gets contribution from Sycamore Creek and Oak Creek and Beaver Creek and Clear Creek and all these other creeks, along with innumerable little springs discharging groundwater into the river. But everybody that puts a well in the district anywhere is sucking water out that would have otherwise discharged into the river. So that's the biggest thing that we're concerned about. Climate change and drought have certainly also done their jobs, and they've contributed also in the fact that now river flows are just never predictable. Climate change has completely taken the predictability out of the system. But the Verde continues to host some of the most diverse habitat anywhere in the state of Arizona. 140 species of birds use the river one way or another. The number of, I don't know how many species Frankie has identified in plants, but now one more. And there aren't very many places in Arizona that have the number of species that of fish, plants, insects, birds, that the Verde does. And that's what the Verde River Institute is primarily concerned about, is conserving that habitat and that kind of diversity. Next slide, Frankie. So Kim, did you want to take this slide? You want me to do that? Okay. So the Verde River Institute was founded in 2012 as a 501c3 nonprofit with the stated mission of providing scientific, culture, and ecological expertise to organizations and people, landowners, and others that are interested in seeing the river continue to flow for one reason or another. And we've become very involved in recreation on the Verde River, knowing that as more people recreate in the river, more people become constituents of the river, more people become concerned about it. And we needed to do that in order to make the point that essentially that water is too cheap in this watershed. And when you want to raise people's water rates, you got to get a bunch of people that care about it in order to do that. So recreation is one way of doing that. Last year, we started our Verde River monitoring and education program. And the goal behind that program is to take people out over about a 12-week course. We have a 1-hour kind of lecture at the beginning out on site, and then we'll do a kayak trip, a 3.5-mile kayak trip, where we demonstrate in situ everything that we've been trying to teach them for that particular lesson. So here people are looking at some of the macroinvertebrates and some of the plant propagation in a small microhabitat along the river. And the river's host to, again, innumerable microhabitats, little bitty bits of the river that seem to have a completely different biota than the main stem of the river. And all of those contribute to that very high diversity. So we'd like to get those conserved. And our students are then now well equipped to go work for another nonprofit that works on Verde River issues, or to teach other people in one of our programs. So we're going to be using a lot of those people as monitors and other things this year. Next slide. Okay. So one of our primary tools in the monitoring and education program is iNaturalist. And what an iNaturalist allows us to do is both log the plants and animals and trees and algae and everything else that we've seen, and be able to also recover that information in a way that's really meaningful and useful to us. So some plants or animals we'll see once and we log it and we know that we saw it. Some will continue to log as we go out, and that gives us a good kind of a history of that species in our area. Are they continuing to show up? Are they here for a season? Are they here all year round? All of those things can be answered by looking at the iNaturalist record. And it was iNaturalist that actually brought Aphyllon riparium to light, because one of our students took a picture of it. And Kim's going to explain how that happened and how what the next courses of action were. So we're a real advocate of iNaturalist and the ability that it has to expand our knowledge using citizen scientists. Next slide, Frankie.
Okay.
Kim, that's yours.
Thanks, Doug. So as we've been talking about this Aphyllon riparium, the top image on the right is a satellite image of the stretch of the Verde River, and you'll see 4 red dots. The dot that's at the very bottom, that is the first site where we first saw the Aphyllon riparium, and that was in 2020. As Doug and Frankie mentioned, we, the Verde River Institute, has the education and monitoring program that we do that includes Doug and I going and patrolling, if you will, a stretch of the Verde River from Tapco to Tuesday Wrap, which is the most easily accessed and public put-ins and takeouts. We monitor that on a regular basis throughout kayaking season, which would be March through late October. We'll be out there on most weekends, Saturday and Sunday, for 5+ hours a day. So over the last several years, with my involvement with the Verde River Institute, you get to know what plants are out there, the colors that you normally see, and such. And on this particular July afternoon, Doug and I were patrolling. We went actually down below the public takeout at Tuesday Wrap. That red dot is actually sitting right below basically Tuesday Goot National Monument. And it's interestingly part of the Verde River Greenway, which is owned and cared for by Arizona State Parks. And it's controlling down that stretch. And that afternoon, the banks there on River Left going downstream are quite steep, and they put you at about eye level with the dirt as I'm sitting in my kayak going down. And it was the purple of the Aphyllon riparium that caught my eye, because we don't normally see a lot of purple flowers on the river there. So it caught my eye, paddled over, and never seen that before, and took a picture of it, and was, you know, that's the first time. And the picture that you see on the bottom left there is the first specimens that were identified in July of 2020. And as you can see, there was 2 or 3 plants, so it was not just one. The interesting thing is the fact that the banks were a little steep there, and I was down in my kayak. It put my eyes right at the dirt level. And as they mentioned, it's a little bit hard to see this plant because it actually is at the base of the cocklebur, and it's hidden under the cocklebur canopy. So if you were walking, doing foot patrol on a trail, and your vantage point, you would have to work really hard to actually find this plant. So it was really convenient, our vantage point, and it was truly the education and monitoring program that we have getting us out there and floating that river almost every weekend, hundreds and hundreds of hours, and just being able to identify something that's out of the norm. And so that was really, exciting. But at that time, we didn't understand the discovery that we had made. So then I'll fast forward to in July of 2022. Now we have this education program that we've started up that Doug mentioned, where we're taking students out, and we had integrated now the iNaturalist app into our program and into our monitoring of the stretch that I described. And it was at that point, one of the students had made an identification of this plant again, and then posted it to iNaturalist. On the map, again, referencing back to it, the top 3 dots were the other 3 spots that were identified when we went monitoring and looking for this plant after the first discovery, which was the last red dot. So as you can see, along the stretch that we kayak and monitor on the Verde River, it was pretty widespread. So as Frankie mentioned, Dr. Turner Collins, he is the expert on Aphyllon, and he actually noticed our students' iNaturalist upload and identification of this plant. And it was actually identified through iNaturalist as, incorrectly though, it was identified as desert broom rape or Aphyllon cooperi. And however, it was Dr. Collins who reached out to the Verde River Institute because he saw the time, which was in the summer, and he knew the location of Arizona, and those didn't add up for that particular species. And it was Dr. Collins who correctly identified it as the Aphyllon riparium. And there's a picture of him down at the bottom where he has studied this particular plant species. Next. So at that point, we teamed up with Frankie. He's already been working with us to team up with our monitoring education program. He's been a guest speaker and provided education on site on our trips for these groups that we take out. So we teamed up with Frankie and all of his expertise, and we had a mission. That day, our mission was to find this species again for him so that he could collect a sample, get photos, and do it properly. So that was actually proved to be quite the challenge because interestingly, when we're kayaking on the river and we identify things through the iNaturalist app, and this happened with our student who I originally identified the species again in 2022, we don't always have phone reception down on the river. And so we couldn't find the plant that she had identified. So Doug and I had been scrambling to find it again because we knew Frankie was going to be coming out with us. And we found, Doug found it. But then a few days later, it was actually near a social trail. And when the social trail was cleared of the cocklebur, this plant was removed. So when we knew Frankie was going to be coming out, we were panicked to be able to find it again for him. So we patrolled about a 3-mile stretch. It took us several hours. It was hot, and we were, as you can see, you can barely see Frankie in some of those pictures. The cocklebur was at the height of its growth and plumage. Luckily, it wasn't on the dying stage, so we weren't stuck with too many cocklebur at the time, but we really had to pilfer through that like a jungle. But Frankie was able to identify another specimen on that trip. And so you can see Frankie with that. And we were able to measure it and collect the seeds and take photos at that time.
So that's you, Kim, I think.
Okay, so here just a couple of pictures. So, you know, Frankie kind of asked, you know, what the conditions were like when we were finding this Aphyllon riparium. And I said, only cockleburr was around and soil. That was it. It wasn't in a thicket of other plants, grasses, or anything like that. It seemed to just really like the bare dirt and cockleburr. So with those instructions and all Frankie's expertise and knowledge, he was like a hound dog, and we put him out in the thickets of cockleburr, and he was able to find this beautiful specimen that we have here. One of the things that I found interesting about this was it was actually, and Frankie can confirm, but it was, I don't know, over 14 feet or so away from the edge of the river, the bank of the river, but it was in the cockleburr thicket. And it was in very dry, silty soil. And you can see we dug down quite deep. The root of it was, you know, over 12 inches or plus. It kept going and going. The picture in the center, you can see there's the leaves that Frankie was talking about being pointed, and then Frankie holding the specimen itself. But yeah, it was quite exciting. It actually had an aromatic light fragrance to it that Frankie and I noticed, which was really interesting. It was a fluted in shape, reminded me of something that a hummingbird or a you know, bird with a long beak that likes nectar would go to or be attracted to. Next.
I think this is where I come in. Thanks, Kim. So yeah, so I'll just go through real quick. I think we're running close to time now. But yeah, so like Kim said, this thing grows just probably 10 to 15 feet away from the stream. It even grows right on the stream banks. And so this thing grows in a really highly disturbed habitat. And so just a couple of photos here showing what type of conditions that these plants are adapted to surviving in. And so you have these humongous floods that flood the Verde, you know, every few years or so. These are some particularly catastrophic floods in these photos. But what happens during these floods is, my slide will change. What happens during these floods, you can see that all this silt and sand will be deposited, huge amounts of silt and sand. And so what happened was there was a huge fire upstream in the watershed, the Raphael fire, that after it burnt, the floods brought down a ton of silt and soil and deposited on the stream banks. You can see these huge deposits on the stream banks. And what happens after you have a huge disturbance event like this? Well, you have all of these weedy, ruderal, disturbance adapted weeds that come in and take over. You know, you have your primary succession that's occurring on these empty substrates. And so that's exactly what happened in this area along the Verde. And cockleburr, of course, is an excellent weed. You know, it sprouts up and it grows anywhere where there's a little bit more moisture. And so that's the habitat that this thing occurs in, is these highly disturbed riparian habitats. Its other hosts are Ambrosia trifida and also Dicoria canescens, which is interesting. That's probably in desert washes or something. I have to look more into that. But otherwise, Ambrosia trifida and Xanthium stromarium both, you know, grow in riparian areas in these highly disturbed habitats.
Yeah, so I think part of this one's missing, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how unlikely this plant is. And part of that story is the seeds, the fruits of the plant each hold, 1 or 2,000 seeds. The seeds are a little smaller than half a millimeter long. And there are on each plant that typically has 5 or 6 stalks, between 250,000 and 1 million seeds in each plant. And I didn't count all million of them, but I did some quick math that indicated to me that that's pretty typical for the plant to have these huge numbers of very small plants. And you notice the seed in the middle picture out there. This is a seed without cotyledons, right? So you don't have any energy for this seed to germinate and to produce a plant. It can't do anything unless it ends up somehow within about 1 to 2 millimeters away from a root of a suitable host. And that root of the suitable host has to be producing the chemistry in the soil that the seed recognizes. The seed has to have been through its stratification and at the right temperature and everything else for that to work. Then the first radical out of the seed has to have a viable hausterium at the end of it, which begins to develop as soon as it notices the chemistry of the host plant. That all adds up to a very, very unlikely event. The likelihood of any one of these plants actually reproducing seems to me to be 1,000,000 to 1. It's just a hard thing to imagine that it ever gets done. You can see the seeds on my finger in that bottom right picture. And so that's, I think, its primary strategy is you just flood the area, you flood the zone with seeds, and eventually you're going to come up with 1 or 2 that might actually hit and be able to germinate. So what's the next slide on this? Okay, that's Frankie again.
Yeah. So so just to kind of tie everything up, just wanted to reemphasize that this thing's widespread. It's rare where it occurs, and so it's just to reemphasize the idea that you never know where you're going to find a rare endangered plant. It could be in these weediest of places. It's quite possible that this thing has been overlooked just simply because people don't want to go bushwhacking in Coburn during the summer. So, simple facts like that. So, yeah. And so, just, there, and also the taxonomic complexity of this group, has probably led to it being overlooked. And so keep your eyes out. And and with any aphyllon, always note the host if possible, which is apparently hard to do sometimes. Turner Collins said that one time he had to dig 15 feet to find the host of a plant. So aphyllon may be growing pretty far from its host, but always note the host.
Okay, well, thank you so much, all 3 of you, for your insight on this. It's a great story. Definitely a collaborative effort, and as you said, there may be many more out there just waiting to be discovered. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.